Canada's new energy minister is laying out his vision to retool our economy by fast-tracking resource projects. In a speech today, Tim Hodgson tried to convince business leaders in Calgary that this government will be different.
I want to be very clear. In the new economy we are building, Canada will no longer be defined by delay. We will be defined by delivery. We have the people. We have the ideas. And we now have a government determined to lead and help unlock the potential of Canadian workers and businesses.
But the Liberals aren't the only party trying to chart a new path for the economy this week. On Tuesday, the Conservatives announced a new Leaders Economic Growth Council to identify the root causes of Canada's economic stagnation and propose practical solutions. Conservative MP Greg McLean is the chair of that new council. I spoke with him yesterday, just after the G7 Finance Ministers Summit wrapped up in Alberta.
Nice to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Well, thanks for having me.
The tricky part of being in opposition is that you got to oppose. You don't get to really introduce everything. What does this council propose to do to actually try to get the economy moving again?
Well, you think about what opposition parties do. They actually are responsible to hold the government accountable. So our role in the House of Commons, of course, is to make sure we try and improve government's legislation every step of the way. And it's a new parliament. We've got to make sure we're working with the other parliamentarians and advancing what we think are better solutions for the Canadian people here. Because at the end, it's about good government for all Canadians that we're trying to achieve. Now, we've been working on that for a long time. You know, I've been here 5.5 years trying to advance the interests of the country that we think are better economic outcomes. And Peter Armstrong recognized this and asked me to head up a council here. Prior to an election, parties always go through this process, at least opposition parties, of presenting what we're going to put forward as economic priorities in the election. Now, we did so. We did so in this past election. And you take a look at some of the key things we put on the table here, including getting rid of the carbon tax, including getting rid of the capital gains tax increase that the Liberals already had on the books before the election, were immediately wiped off the table because of the effectiveness of what we brought to the table in actually assessing these economic outcomes that the government was leading the country down the path towards. So these are effective outcomes at the end of the day for the whole country. And I think people have to look at that. We want to continue that process, obviously, and make sure, even though there isn't an election on the horizon, that we're looking at the economic growth options for Canada going forward here and making sure that we have the ability to move them forward. Now, you heard my leader, Peter Armstrong, talk to the new Prime Minister, and he says, take our ideas and implement them for the better of the country. Fine, we come up with the ideas and you get to use them while you're in government for the next 4 years, potentially. Use some of these good ideas to make sure we get some advancement in the economy in Canada.
You're a business guy. Your background is in finance, oil and gas, back in Alberta. This council that you're heading up says, according to the official announcement, it's going to consult widely to gather data, feedback, and insight from businesses, labor organizations that identify the root causes of Canada's economic stagnation, propose practical solutions. Do we need more study? I mean, it feels like we all know what the answers are. How do we actually get them going? And how do you do that as the opposition? How do you sort of try to goose that along?
Well, if we knew exactly what the answers are, we wouldn't have to ask the questions. If everybody knew what the answers were, perhaps the government would be moving in the direction towards those solutions. Now, we're the opposition party. We want to make sure that we get this full input from all the players across the country. This is going to be multi-province all the way across the country, making sure we're getting input about what's better for the whole country here from every perspective. So we're going to speak with, policy groups all across the country, industries all across the country, making sure that they get to put on the table what they see as holding back their growth in the economy right now, and make sure we've got some actual options about how we make some government changes at the federal level so we can advance those interests of the whole country in that respect. Now, that whenever it comes from an opposition party, I mean, the Liberals are famous for this. They say the Conservatives have no policy. So, okay, well, Conservatives have policy, but it's terrible policy. And then they say, okay, we'll take those policies now, thank you very much. The issue is to identify those policies, even in this next 4-year period, potential 4-year period, where we actually do need to advance the Canadian economy before an election, before we have to put out our own election ideas going into the next election. We want to make sure that Canadians benefit from a stronger economy here going forward.
But in the moment, like you say, they took the carbon tax idea. That's good. You say they took the capital gains tax idea. That's great too. What's next? What is the top of the list of things that you want them to move on
this week?
Well, if you had to ask me that, first of all, let's address that. Okay, they kind of came to that conclusion at the election, but take a look at that whole front bench you have in the Liberal Party, the new Liberal government there.
I get that, and listen.
No, I'm going to say this very clearly because they actually spent. I can give you hundreds of speeches in the House of Commons where they actually argued exactly the opposite of what they came out with in the election.
I hear you.
So it is that flip-flop that's happened here. Recognize how effective opposition that actually was at that point in time. But take a look at the other things that need to happen here rather quickly, and we've identified them. What we thought were the initial ones, like the repeal of the Impact Assessment Act. Now, the Supreme Court of Canada has already come out with its position saying that the Impact Assessment Act, Bill C-69, is somewhat ultra-virus. And it's been over a year and a half, and the government hasn't come back with any changes to that at this point in time. So one of the things that has to happen. But we want that to come not from the opposition party, but to make sure we're getting the full feedback of all the people that are affected by what we see as the impediments right now to the Canadian economy advancing the way it should. Let's recognize that we're the second worst performing economy in the OECD, the 36 countries
per capita,
around the
but
world.
we're not. Anyways, the biggest impediment, I think we would agree, to the Canadian economy right now remains tariffs. Are we agreed on that?
Well, tariffs is a recent phenomenon.
Sure, but right now,
so we'll see what
thing in
happens
front
to
of us.
tariffs in the very near future here, because tariffs are hard on everybody. Tariffs is a tax, both on the producer and the consumer at the end of the day, right? So you've got to make sure you're addressing these things going forward, but you also got to look at what are the other impediments. Why has Canada performed less well than its peers in the world as a result of policies over the last 10 years? Those are the things that have to be identified, making sure that all the interest in the economy, bring that forward rather clearly as part of our job here. So it's not just the opposition parties trying to score points here. Quite frankly, we want to make sure that we're echoing what people across the country are saying as far as how we make this economy better.
I don't disagree with you on that. I only asked about tariffs because I want to get to the G7 finance ministers' final communique, because the wording of it I found interesting. They said, we acknowledge that economic policy uncertainty has declined from its peak, but it doesn't go on to mention the word tariff at all. There's a lot of question about whether that was, a concession to Scott Bessent in the United States. Is this a strong enough outcome at a summit with the United States in this moment with tariffs looming so large?
Well, we looked at and we listened to Minister Champagne, Canada's new finance minister, and it sounded like a whole bunch of platitudes, if you will. We'd like to see some specifics here about what is going to be solved going forward here. So we do need to land on something that isn't a whole bunch of this, that, and the next thing, a word salad of potential solutions here, but let's actually look at the outcomes here we need to come to. And if there's one or two that say this is the main focus we need to get at here, if one of those is saying we need to find a way to get past the tariff situation and actually get back to business as usual between countries that trade around the world, well, and find a way to do that. But what you're saying that tariffs is the number one problem.
I'm asking. I think it probably is. But
okay, so if tariffs is the number one problem, and this is the G7 meeting in Banff, why isn't there tariffs in this communique?
Fair. Listen, I think it's a very fair question. We're also not going to get a budget until the fall. I think we're going to get a budget in the fall. What are your concerns about not getting a proper look at the government books?
Well, it's an absolute lack of accountability. And Minister Champagne has to own this at the end of the day. Got a new government coming in here. Now, they put forward their policy proposal. They put forward effectively a budget going into this election campaign about where they were going to see the deficit over the next 4 years. And they costed that out with a whole bunch of proposals and, of course, $60 billion plus in deficits over the next handful of years. Now they've got to put the proof in the pudding there. This is a legacy government. It's not a new government where they have to figure out where the spending is, where it needs to go. It's a legacy government. So you already know where you're spending. You already know what the programs are on the horizon here. So come to the table here and actually present something to Canadians. Waiting till the fall, when we haven't seen Parliament since December, is a bit of an embarrassment. So accountability still has to be there. Think of our role again. We're the loyal opposition. So we need them to hold them to account on what they're actually putting on the table here. Giving a blank check and saying, look, go ahead and spend what you want, do what you want, as opposed to here's the plan to spend, here's the accountability we're going to have for Canadians, is a bit of a free ride. And I'm surprised that the new Prime Minister is starting off his government this way.
I usually report on the economy, so I don't dig deep on the politics stuff, but I got a couple of rapid-fire ones for you. Radio Canada's Christian Noel, my colleague, reported today that there's increasing pressure inside your party for Poilievre to fire his campaign manager, Jenny Byrne. Do you support her staying on?
I don't know Jenny Byrne at all. Thank you very much. And those are decisions that are made at a level, that's not my parliamentary level.
You don't care one way or the other?
I don't have any input on the decision, and nobody's asked my opinion on it. And frankly, I think that there needs to be accountability mechanisms in every organization. So I think a review of who's responsible for what is something that should happen in any organization, and I think that should happen with the proper personnel in my party. And like I say, I'm a parliamentarian as opposed to working in the Conservative Party of Canada.
Do you support Pierre Poilievre staying on as
Yes, I do.
leader? And finally, you're the MP for Calgary Centre. Do you oppose Alberta holding a referendum on separating from Canada?
Look, a referendum is, like, you think about, if you think about protests, what protests are is a way of a release valve in a democratic society so the government can see what's on the horizon here. Now, you take a look at the supposed support that some sort of separation or sovereignty would have in Alberta. It is way below the threshold of actually accomplishing what the people that are supporting that want. Nevertheless, there are irritants in Confederation right now, particularly with the Western Canadian provinces, Saskatchewan and Alberta primarily, on the way our resource sector has been held back by the previous 10 years of this government. So we've got to make sure we address those and not make sure that we continue to have what many people in Alberta see as taxation without representation, and actually move forward with something that's better for the whole country. A strong Alberta leads to a strong Canada. The two go hand in hand, and we want to make sure we continue with that equation going forward.
I began my reporting career in Quebec, reporting on the long, decades-long economic impact of questions like this looming over that province. Do you worry about the impact this kind of debate could have on investment, on growth, on hiring?
Of course I do. You think about any type of uncertainty as far as investment goes, holds back our economic development. Now think about what we're here to talk about today, this Economic Growth Council, Leaders Economic Growth Council that's been put together. One of the things that holds that back in Canada, of course, is the cost of capital here, because risk is considered higher in Canada because of the government policies. So if you actually throw in some more potential referendums into that equation, risk goes higher. So the risk premium for finance goes higher again. Now, this is something we want to make sure we get investment back into Canada, so get our cost of capital back down. Some economic peace would come from some political peace, if you will. And I would encourage the government to actually come to the table and address the concerns that Albertans have, the Alberta businesses have, the Alberta government has, about how they've been treated for these past 10 years in this Liberal government.
We've got to leave it there, but really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you for having me.